Kia ora team, welcome to our third block of content before exam 2. This week is the lymphatic system and our body's defences, and we're going to look at the structures that comprise the lymphatic system and explain how the lymphatic system is functionally related to the cardiovascular system and how it supports our immunity. So the lymphatic system carries fluid that is leaked out of our cardiovascular capillaries and outside of the cellular space, and it helps absorb and carry that fluid back into the cardiovascular system on the deoxygenated side of the heart. It does this by absorbing fluid, just much like a sponge, and sending that fluid back towards the heart in a one-way system. This fluid must be returned to the circulation via lymphatics in order to maintain cardiovascular function, so things like in maintaining blood volume, blood pressure, and this also provides an opportunity for our white blood cells, our leukocytes, to filter out anything that is foreign in the system that shouldn't be there. So just to sort of summarize those things, lymphatic system transports fluids and other important components such as cells and nutrients within the body. So something that we don't talk about a lot but is a function is that digestible triglycerides or fats actually use the lymphatic system to get into our cardiovascular system through chylomicrons or cholesterol. Lymphatic system also helps maintain our fluid balance, helps disease fighting functions, and all includes helping maintaining homeostasis. It's interlinked with the cardiovascular system and is therefore a part of the overall circulatory system of the body. The lymphatic system network includes lymphatic fluid, lymphatic vessels, lymphatic tissues, lymphatic organs, and lymphocytes. And we'll explain all of these next. So the lymphatic system contains lymphatic fluid called lymph that flows through a series of vessels. These lymphatic vessels don't form a closed loop like our blood train or our cardiovascular system, but instead they start off blindly, as in they have blunt ends, and then those blunt ends move all the way back towards your heart. So it's a one-way direction. It's not even a there and back direction, it's a from point A to point B only. And what the purpose is to move fluid from point A back to point B, and point B is the left and right subclavian veins, sub meaning deep, or under, clavian meaning clavicle, so we know where our clavicle is, and the veins which sit underneath. So it's on our the side of the heart where there's lower pressure and deoxygenated blood is returning back to the right atrium. So here's a diagram of those subclavian veins. You'll see the right side and the left side. If there was a skeleton on top of that, the clavicle would be sitting right on top of those subclavian veins. You'll also see that there's a blue shaded region and a left skin color shaded region. The right side, all of the lymphatic fluid from this side of the body is all drained back to the right subclavian vein, and then all of the left and lower half of the body is all drained back towards the left subclavian vein. So let's just look at lymphatic fluid. Most body fluids are inside cells, but you also have some extracellular body fluids, and those are fluids that are outside of a cell. So that includes the plasma in your bloodstream, interstitial fluid, which is tissue fluids that are outside of a cell but not in your blood, so they're surrounding the outside of cells, and then lymph and lymphatic vessels and nodes. And these are all very similar types of fluids. They just have different names depending on where they are. Lymph fluid originates from blood plasma, so it is blood plasma, and it's looks like that vial on the side, the sort of clearish, whitish, watery substance, and it leaks out of our blood capillaries, where we know that our blood capillaries are semi-permeable and gases move in and out, nutrients move in and out. Well, plasma can also leak out as well because of the holes. So we have this clear colorless fluid. It's like plasma, but it has much less proteins because those proteins can't get out of those capillaries. And we have about 3 liters of fluid, of this lymph fluid, circulated each day. Then we have our lymphatic vessels, which is the collective term given to the system of vessels that transport this lymphatic fluid. Lymphatic fluid is the plasma that is now not in our cardiovascular system, but inside our lymph vessels. And you can see on this diagram, you've got the cardiovascular system represented by the venous system and the arterial system, or the deoxygenated side and the oxygenated side. And then you've got this one-way system in the green that's transporting leaked interstitial fluid that's come out of the blood capillaries. It's absorbing them like a sponge and funneling that lymph fluid back up towards the heart. Now these vessels, these lymphatic vessels, have a similar structure to blood vessels, except their walls are much thinner. They're much more permeable, meaning the holes are bigger and they allow a lot more fluid to get in, much more like a sponge, and they have a stack load more valves compared to veins. Again, main reason is because there is no pump in the system like our cardiovascular system. Just like our veins, these valves open in one-way direction, moving lymph towards the center of the body. As I said, it doesn't have a pump. Lymph flows from one direction, always towards the heart. Skeletal muscle contraction, just like our venous system, creates a squeeze kind of pump situation that helps move lymph fluid back towards the heart. And then breathing changes, so we understand that we can change pressure within our thoracic cavity. That also helps to funnel lymph fluid finally back into the venous side of the cardiovascular system. Our lymphatic capillaries, I think of them as looking like our fingers. So remember, we had this to represent our cardiovascular system as a loop. Well, our lymphatic system is more like this. My fingers represent the capillaries, blunt-ended, closed off, hollow tubes, and these are located in between the spaces of our capillaries. See, it sort of sit like this. As fluid is absorbed by these lymph capillaries, the fluid moves through the lymphatic chain and it joins into a bigger structure, which I think of as my forearm, as lymphatic trunks. And at the very top, close to the heart, there's a duct, which is a bit like any other ducting system that ducts air into your house. That lymph fluid flows through the ducts, and that's where it goes into the cardiovascular system to restock that plasma volume inside your blood. Just like our left and right subclavian veins, you have these ducts which enter those subclavian veins. The right lymphatic duct drains lymph from the right arm and the right side of the head and the right side of the torso into the right subclavian vein, and it's that green thing that's funneling into that right subclavian vein. And then the left lymphatic duct, which is sometimes called thoracic duct, drains lymph from the remaining parts of the body. So left upper half of the body and all of the lower half of the body. And then we have these series of lymph nodes through that lymphatic system, that network of lymphatic vessels. They're bean-shaped, located along the lymphatic chain. They contain specific leukocytes called lymphocytes. So a leukocyte just means white blood cell. A lymphocyte is a white blood cell found in our lymph nodes, and they act as powerful defense stations to cleanse and filter lymphatic fluid. The structure of this lymph node, you'll see you've got 4 arrows coming in and 2 arrows leaving. What this does is slows down the flow of fluid through the node so that internally the lymphocytes and the structures within the node can clean out any foreign invaders that are inside those lymph nodes, like a filtering process. So the flow of lymph fluid slows down so that this process can be more efficient. During periods of infection, lymph nodes may be enlarged. So we've all felt, when you're sick, your standard assessment tool is to feel your neck, and they're sensitive, swollen. It's because the lymph nodes are in action, fighting off some kind of invader, some kind of bacteria or virus, and they become enlarged and a bit sensitive. We have these superficial nodes located around the body, cervical nodes around our neck, axillary nodes around our armpits, inguinal nodes in our groin, and popliteal nodes, which aren't on the diagram but are positioned behind the knee. And the massage therapists out there will know these as their like no-go zones, or I can't remember what Carolyn calls them, but they're like high danger zones where you wouldn't put a lot of pressure in these areas because they're sensitive. Some other lymphatic tissues that we have that help fight foreign invaders are our tonsils and our adenoids. Some of us may have had those removed. through continual infections, but they're lymphatic tissues that are located along our respiratory tract. So they are our immune system first line of defense against inhaled foreign pathogens. So inhaling something gets into our throat and our mouth, our tonsils and adenoids are a first line of defense of fighting off those invaders. And then we have these Peyer's patches. I've never understood the name, but they're similar kind of tissue to the tonsils and adenoids, but they are located along the digestive tract, and they contribute to our first line of defense against anything ingested, so something that we've eaten. They contribute to getting rid of those foreign invaders. Then we have two lymphatic organs that are important to know. Thymus, which is located inferior to your thyroid, which is a little higher. It's located posterior to the sternum, so behind your sternum. It's responsible for maturing specific leukocytes. So leukocytes meaning white blood cells, and in particular specific type of lymphocytes, so the ones that travel through our lymphatic system. And we'll talk about these when we look at body's defenses. Our spleen, which we had to label in the first exam, is our largest lymphatic organ. It stores leukocytes or white blood cells, which help destroy old red blood cells. So your spleen is sort of a space where old red blood cells go to be recycled and broken down, but it also acts as a bit of a blood reservoir, like a storage of blood for a small amount that can be released during times of blood loss. Okay, so that's the lymphatic system. Now we're going to look at how it contributes to fighting off baddies. So we're going to look at this game of good and evil. So immunity is not a system as we know it, as we've studied so far, but more like a interaction of a network of cells, tissues and organs that all work together to defend against the body's attacks from foreign invaders. These foreign invaders can be really, really small, so they can produce infections such as bacteria, viruses, parasites and fungi. Other terms that you'll hear are antigen, pathogens, or baddie. So sometimes I'll just say baddie, and that's just so you know that it's something that's not supposed to be there. And an antigen is different because it triggers a specific type of response to our immune system, but we'll look at that later on. The human body is warm. It's a welcoming environment for many microbes to invade, so it's our immune system's job to keep them out. Okay, so the first thing to understand is that we have these two different systems that function together. But the first one is our innate or non-specific. It's our first line of defense. We also have our second line of defense, but it responds immediately. It's our initial protection against anything foreign in the body. And it's working all the time, constantly fighting off pathogens that we breathe in, that we eat, things that we touch in the outside environment. It's the reason why we can put our hand in the rubbish bin and not just be overrun with bacteria. And then number two is our adaptive or specific immune system. It's our third line of defense. It's as the title says, it's adaptive, so it can change. It's specific to certain types of invaders. It protects against particular foreign pathogens. It needs to be activated by a particular pathogen in order for the specific defense or adaptation to occur. So this is where the whole antigen thing comes in. So here's a cool little diagram just to split up or summarize our innate and our adaptive immunity. And we're going to talk about all of these things from now on, but this is a good way to sort of summarize these two. And this diagram here, or this table here, then just breaks down our innate and our adaptive, and then the first, second, and third line of defense. Be familiar with this. We're going to answer some questions in the exam, in the tutorial worksheet, but this is again is another good summary of our immune system at work. So let's look at our first line of defense. So this is our non-specific immune system, barriers and reflexes. So I'm just going to go through a whole stack of examples, but it's things that protect our body from things getting in just through a physical barrier, like a shield. So skin provides a physical barrier. Skin glands secrete sweat and sebum. that creates an environment that's a bit acidic, so bacteria has trouble growing on our skin. Melanin provides protection against UV radiation. Hairs in your nose, sneezing, coughing, protect against things that we're trying to inhale through our respiratory tract. Everyone's experienced having dust in their nose and sneezing. It's all to try and keep things out. Tears, so tears are related to emotion, but also if something is in your eye, your eyes will start to well up or cry, and it's to keep it out. Saliva contains antibacterial properties, so things that we eat are broken down by your saliva. Blinking can help get rid of irritants. Earwax provides a sticky barrier from substances trying to get into your ear canal. And we've all experienced the production of mucus, which traps organisms and allows them either to be swallowed or spat out. Stomach is very acidic, breaks down bacteria as well as food. It's a pretty harsh environment. Your intestines have a whole lot of bacteria, good bacteria within them that help break down and control bad bacteria. Urine is actually sterile, which protects against the urinary tract against infections. And vomiting, diarrhea are also ways that your body uses to get rid of something that shouldn't be in your digestive system. Here's again a bit of a summary of all of those things, so you can use this as a study tool of examples of first line of defense. Now we're going to look at our second line of defense. So this is cellular responses. So this is where we start looking at our white blood cells and what they're doing. Cellular responses involve the reactions of our leukocytes. Leukocytes means white blood cells. There are a few different types of white blood cells, all with different jobs and roles. Can get very technical. We're going to try and simplify these into the main ones that are involved with our second and third line of defense. Now, a phagocyte, think of phago equals eating, so we've got Pac-Man here. When pathogens bust through the first line of defense into underlying tissues, then they will be confronted by some kind of phagocyte, and this phagocyte will eat and devour this bacteria or invader, which has a whole lot of enzymes into breaking that down. Now, specific examples of types of phagocytes or eating cells are our neutrophils. We have lots of these. They're the most abundant. They eat the pathogen, one pathogen, self-destruct, and the aftermath of that self-destruction is pus. So if you've had a wound or an injury where it's been, there's pus involved, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means that there are a whole stack of neutrophils fighting off something that is there that shouldn't be. Macrophages, think Big Macs. They're supposed to be big, a big eater. So it's a chief phagocyte that can eat multiple amounts of baddies or invaders, so not just one. They can be fixed in one place and grab baddies as they move past, or they can move around. They're also what's called an antigen presenting white blood cell, which means it eats a baddie and then it puts a receptor out on its cell membrane that basically gives information about the baddie that it's eaten, and that helps coordinate other cells to go, okay, this is what we're dealing with, this is how we fight it. So the macrophage is pretty important. It can actually link up with the third line of defense and help coordinate specific invaders. For example, if a chickenpox virus comes in and a macrophage eats one of those, it will present the information about what this is on the outside so that it can communicate with other good white blood cells. Here's a couple of diagrams which we'll look at in the tutorial, but we've basically got on the left a nail's gone through a foot or some skin. Neutrophils have been sent to the local spot. There's actually been a signal where those blood vessels have dilated. It allows these neutrophils to squeeze through the semi-permeable membrane, and then these neutrophils come in and eat those rod-shaped bacteria. And then if you think about a whole lot of this bacteria being eaten by neutrophils, they're exploding and leaving pus. That's what a kind of like an infection might look like, is neutrophils working overtime. The diagram on the right just shows a technical example of what's happening when this bacteria, for example, has been eaten. It's engulfed by the membrane. It has lysosomes within this neutrophil, which those lysosomes, which you know are like the garbage disposal units, have enzymes which help break down this, and then the debris of what's left over is spat out the back. Neutrophil can only eat one bacteria, or baddie, whereas macrophage can eat multiple. Same process, phagocytosis. Now this is called our natural killer cells. So these are white blood cells that patrol your blood, looking for abnormal cells. So think of it as like a police force of the system. So they're going around identifying and checking up on your own cells to see if they've been invaded or infected. So they directly lyse or bust open and kill virus-infected or cancerous body cells. I think of it, if we go along the police analogy of having like a baton, they attach themselves to the cell and poke a hole into this infected human cell, inject it with proteins, and this triggers what's called apoptosis or cell death. So it goes around and goes, you're infected, pokes it with the stick, injects these proteins which trigger that cell to self-destruct, and then what you see at the end is a macrophage comes along and eats that dying cell. So it sort of the natural killer cells weaken infected human cells. So it's killing your own cells that have been infected. Another second line of defense is the inflammatory response. Everyone's experienced acute inflammation. It's triggered by an injury. So if we think about that nail going into the skin, that triggers this whole response. So mast cells, which are types of cells found in connective tissue, release a molecule called histamine, and that triggers this whole inflammatory response. Antihistamines stop this process. So if your body detects something like pollen, which isn't dangerous, but detects it as being an invader and it shouldn't be there, then that's why we get allergies to things like pollen during in the springtime. So we take antihistamines to stop this response because we don't actually need it. So this release of histamine triggers blood cell or blood vessel dilation in the area responsible. More dilation of blood vessels, and it means more blood flow to the area. Bigger vessels means those holes in the capillaries are a bit bigger, so it makes them more permeable. So it means things can leak out. So plasma will leak out a little bit more, so that creates swelling. And then it also means that those neutrophils can move through those holes into the area that's been impacted by the injury. So we've got swelling because of the leaked out plasma, we've got heat because of blood flow, blood is hot. We have a loss of function because of the swelling. We'll also have the pain receptors in our skin being stimulated by the swelling, which creates pain. We'll also have a loss of function because of the swelling, and there'll be some redness because of the heat and the extra blood. And here's a big breakdown of that whole system and what is happening. And this inflammatory response is what our long answer question is for this week. Second line of defense, so another system that we have is fever, and again we've all probably experienced a fever before. If you are a parent, you for sure would have had a kid that has had a fever. So when pathogens overrun the body's first and second line of defense, the hypothalamus is signaled. Hypothalamus is in your brain, it's your temperature control, and it triggers an increase in metabolism, sorry, an increase in temperature. And an increase in your body's temperature increases the metabolism or the functioning of your white blood cells. It also creates an environment for bacteria specifically and viruses where that temperature is a harsh environment for them and they can't function so well. So we ramp up the ability for our white blood cells to do what they do best, and we decrease the ability for the baddies, white blood invaders, bacteria, viruses, pathogens to do their damage. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the technical stuff, which is our third line of defense. Now this is adaptive and specific, so it means that this system can respond specifically to a certain invader, and it can be adaptive to it. It learns how to fight. So we've got our B cells and our T cells. These are the two leukocytes, well, white blood cells, or our lymphocytes, because they patrol our lymphatic system, that act against particular foreign substances. It's systemic, meaning they fight within the whole body, not in an isolated area like the nail in the foot. so it's not restricted to the initial infection site. It has memory, so it recognizes and mounts a stronger attack on previously encountered pathogens and antigens. So anything that's happened in the past that's been bad, it can recognize these, remember how it worked best to fight off this invader, and mount a stronger attack next time. Chickenpox is a good example. Our B cells, so these are leukocytes, also called lymphocytes because they're in our lymph system, are produced in our bone marrow, where all blood cells are produced. But they also mature in the bone marrow. So think B for bone marrow, made and matured in our bone marrow. They multiply. They can produce things called antibodies, which are types of proteins, and we'll talk about those next. And they also have memory. So an antibody, which is specific to B cells, is produced by our B cells in response to the presence of an antigen. So an antigen is a baddie that comes in that triggers an immune response by our B cells. If it doesn't trigger an immune response from our B cells, then it's not classified as an antigen. Antibodies are Y-shaped proteins, so they look like this Y shape, which attach to pathogens, so attach to baddies, and that allows, when they attach to this baddie, it slows down what the baddie can do. And generally cells communicate with other cells through interaction of their membranes. Well, if it has a whole lot of these Y-shaped proteins around the membrane, it means that those cells, those bad cells, can't do and replicate as quickly as if they could without these antibodies around them. So you'll see on this diagram up here, it's a little bit like Space Invaders. You've got purple, red, green, yellow, blue, brown. This antibody here is specific to the yellow. So if purple, red, blue, green, or brown came in, this antibody would have no effect on those baddies. It would only have effect on the yellow ones. So we want, if yellow invades, we want all of these yellow antibodies present. Now let's look at our T cells. They're produced in our bone marrow also, but they are sent to the thymus to be matured, and they are triggered by a virus. So think of T cells as they coordinate the specific immune system. They ring I think of them as ringing the alarm bell, and this activates macrophages to come in and do their work. And remember, a macrophage can then present the baddie on its surface, its cell membrane, to help inform everyone else what's going on and what kind of baddie is involved. So T cells help coordinate and ring the alarm bell and get macrophages on board. T cells can also multiply. They also have memory. Excuse me. When these lymphocytes are exposed to antigens, so antigens are something that triggers an immune response, they multiply, but they also create long-lasting memory cells which hang out in your body forever. These memory cells stay in the body long term and carry the specific instructions for fighting the pathogen if it comes back. So memory cells recognize the pathogen for next exposure. So let's just look at an animated version of what I'm trying to sort of get across, and hopefully this keeps it nice and simple. So we have a pathogen that comes in. So pathogen is just a baddie, some kind of foreign invader enters the body, and then it starts to multiply and spread because the body is warm, it's fluidy, it's got nutrients, so it's thinking this is a pretty cool place to be. Multiply and spread, you start getting sick. Alright, so our body then starts to attack, so innate immunity, but non-specific. So that's like our neutrophils, macrophages start to attack. They will start presenting the instructions for fighting this thing on its surface. That's going to coordinate our natural killer cells, so all of our second line cellular responses. But then also we've got our B cells and our T cells, and they will start to recognize this baddie. B cells will start to produce antibodies. Antibodies will attach to the baddie. The macrophages will start to work, and eventually we will fight off that infection, and we'll be left with these memory B and T cells, which there won't be many, but they float around in the system and are specific to what just came in. Let's say it was chickenpox. So now these two B and T cell memory cells only recognize and have all of the symbols and instructions for fighting off chickenpox. So let's say chickenpox attacks again. This time your B and T cells are there. They recognize it very quickly. macrophages start to do their work, neutrophils, natural killer cells are happening, more B and T cells are produced that understand this type of virus or infection. Antibodies are produced very quickly, and this war against this chickenpox and virus happens much quicker, and we don't get sick. If we look at these types of immunity, we've got active and passive. So active is naturally acquired, so infection happens to us, and this whole process happens naturally, and we produce these memory cells. Or artificially happens, and that's what a vaccine is. We're exposed to a weak version of the infection or the virus or the bacteria, or a deadened version of it, but those B and T and memory cells are produced. Passive, this can happen naturally, and this is what happens with breastfeeding. Mum passes on antibodies that she has produced from her memory B cells to the baby, either through the placenta or through breastfeeding, or artificially, so injection through donated antibodies. But passive immunity doesn't last, doesn't have memory, whereas active immunity does. So that's why vaccines work. Lab-created preparations containing weakened or dead microbes or part of a microbe, they're introduced to the body to stimulate a primary immune response. In the future, the immune system will remember this pathogen and defend the body against it. Okay, crew, again, don't panic. It's another one that's quite full on, and the immune system could pretty much be a study in its own. So really tried to simplify it, and I know saying simplified and it's still confusing can be a bit daunting. But trust the process. Let's have a crack at some of this in the tutorial worksheet. Practice the online, practice the practice test, which I'll get up onto Moodle ASAP, and use your break time to get some study done if you can. Alright, see you first week back.